that's about. But anyway, I assume it's that Simon Cowell. And also Gordon Brown, who was the Prime Minister. And before that, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. So thank you very much to Tom. Now remember, questions, not comments.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Good evening to you, and I'm very grateful for that introduction. It was good to see, I think we're seeing the video now. Is that right? I shouldn't say so. That's right.
Oh, hold on just a minute. Where's the BDA manifesto? I want to show it to this man. Have you seen this before? It's deaf people's rights. This is what this is all about. We need this. So I think you go back to your office, you have a look, and then come back, and then we can talk about it. Okay? Thank you.
Perhaps you've had people knock at your door representing political parties, and you may wonder why. Well, there's a general election coming up, and that affects us both locally and nationally, for example, on the NHS, immigration, education, tax and spend. What about deaf people? Now, the BDA manifesto is important because you can ask the political parties, do you support this? If they do, vote for them. For example, do you want a BSL Act? As they're on the process to getting in Scotland. Finland already has one. You could ask for support on that. What about education? What about bilingual, bicultural education, which is really important for deaf children to access education via interpreters? What about the media? Do you want more sign language programs shown? We have in-vision interpreters, but when there's a crisis, the news doesn't have an interpreter. If you want support on achieving that, ask the person who asks for your vote. Good luck.
Right, thank you very much. Good evening, and once again, hello, my name's Tom Bauer, and I'm a writer. I've written about 23 books by now, and I'm at the moment writing a book about Tony Blair, which is very appropriate for the moment. Now let me briefly introduce you to each panelist. On my right is Kate Green. Kate has been the Shadow Minister for Disabled People since 2013. She's been a Member of Parliament for Stretford and Umston in Greater Manchester since 2010 and will be standing again next month. She's a former Director of the National Council for One-Parent Families and Chief Executive of the Child Poverty Action Group. She was a magistrate in the City of London for 16 years. Welcome, Kate. On my immediate right is Lord Mike German of the Liberal Democrats. He's the disability spokesman and chair of the parliamentary group for the DWP. a one-time leader of the City of Cardiff Council. He was then elected to the Welsh Assembly in 1999 and became the Deputy Welsh Minister in 2000. He was later elected as the leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats and was elevated to the House of Lords in 2010. On my far left is Gary Hard of the UKIP, for Lewisham West and Penge. He is deaf, co-founder of Silent World Sans Frontières, a social enterprise aimed at helping deaf and disabled people. On my immediate left is Simon Hart. Simon Hart is well known among the deaf community. He was recently selected as parliamentary candidate for the Green Party in Oldham West and Royton. He is only the second deaf BSL user in British political history to stand for Parliament after David Buxton. He runs his own business and works part-time at the University of Central Lancashire. Welcome, Simon. Unfortunately, the Conservatives, who were asked to send a representative, were unable to do so. Mike Harper, the Minister for Disabled People, was invited but could not make it. Now, I will ask each of the four people a statement or an introduction for 3 minutes, and we'll start with Star. For UKIP. Gary, sorry. So sorry. I got the wrong script here. I do apologize.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm so happy to see so many people who, myself, have shared so much of experiences for being disabled. I'm profoundly deaf myself, and like all of us here, except for a couple of people here, we've shared all the obstacles, all the have to jump over all the things that we have to do. Obviously, I'm saddened for Star Everest, who sent her apologies because she was unable to be here due to the fact that she was taken unwell only yesterday, and it was a bit of a panic for me to turn up and be here on time. So, what did you keep me? Well, okay, all I can say is that I will do my very best in answering all your questions for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike German.
Oh, good evening, everybody. I'm probably the only person in this room who doesn't have a vote, because we don't have a vote in the House of Lords, and if you're a member, you don't have, because we're already in Parliament. So, and this is particularly distressing for my wife, who is my parliamentary candidate. So for the first time, I can't vote for her, and I couldn't even sign her nomination paper. The issues that are before us tonight are very significant, and you have a very large voice in the way that our country will be governed after May the 7th. If 16% of our population have hearing loss, and of those, that's 1 in every 6, and if 2 in every 6 people is of working age, it is a very significant part of our whole culture and our economy. I think that if there were to try and sum up at the beginning the attitude that I think we ought to take towards this community which we are here this evening, is that first of all, that we need to ensure that we provide a society which is fair, it's understanding and aware. Many people are not aware of the difficulties that people face, but if we are to be fair, then we have to look at people's needs in the round, and we have to provide understanding of meeting those needs. Secondly, we have to provide opportunity. A society which is built upon equality of opportunity must ensure that there is a level playing field for everyone, and giving a good start in life right through to providing opportunities for work and employment, and tailoring the needs which everyone has to the individual, rather than trying to put a big stamp of one size fits all. And then thirdly, that I think the most important thing is that we must be considerate and provide hope and self-esteem to everyone. And that is whether you are in the deaf community or whether you are in the hearing community. Self-esteem is important to us all to understand the society in which we live. I think that we need to see a greater presence of deaf people in the workplace, in the media, and of course in politics. And what we need is a greater public discussion of the issues facing deaf people, and that's why I very much welcome the opportunity this evening of having this debate and this discussion to bring these issues to the fore. And that's why I think we are all here tonight to ensure that that voice, the voice of your community, is felt and heard right across the political spectrum.
Thank you, Mike. Kate, you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to attend the BDA hustings this evening and to see such a packed and, if I may say, attentive room. And I'm looking forward to a lively and challenging debate this evening and for a really good exchange of views. I stand as a Labour candidate who believes passionately, as does my party, in equality, in justice, and in the inclusion of everyone in our society. And I believe in that not just because it's manifestly right to do that, but because it's in the interests of our whole society that everybody has the same opportunity and chance to participate and to contribute. And that so goes to the heart of why it's important for us as politicians to be considering our policies in relation to disabled people and in relation to deaf people, because if our policies do not deliver justice and equality to deaf and to disabled people, we are excluding and we are missing out on so much of the capacity and potential of this country. And that's why the Labour Party policies in relation to education, in relation to employment, in relation to the design and access to our public services has to work for everybody. We have to hardwire into our policies the way in which they work for deaf people. And I look forward this evening to talking a little more about how we can do that. But one further thing I want to say, the respect and the dignity that we afford to every single member of our society is the other core value on which I stand as a Labour Party member. And we know that there is too much abuse, too much hate crime, too much scepticism about deaf, about all disabled people in this country. There is disrespect and there is injustice towards them. And a Labour government will not tolerate that. It is not acceptable, it is wrong, and we will tackle and challenge it. And we also know that deaf people have so many roles in our community, as parents, as friends, as colleagues, as students, as neighbours, as members of our community, and in public life, and we need to harness all those roles. And I'm here to say to you that a Labour government is determined that when we come to make policies, it will be in co-production with you. It's why we've said we will establish a cross-governmental committee of ministers and disabled people working alongside jointly to produce the strategies and policies that we need for the inclusion of everyone. And I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you, Kate. Simeon, 3 minutes.
Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted the BDA asked me to be here to represent the Green Party. Of course, like the other candidates, I want to talk about equality. But actually, I also think an incredibly important word in this, and that politicians don't understand, is empathy. It's not just about being told information, it's about the actual experience of those barriers in everyday life, what that experience is like, and that's crucial. Having empathy for that experience is so important. Why I'm involved in the Green Party is because they believe properly in equality, in sharing, in collaboration, and sharing across cultures and across communication, gathering information so that in the end you can make a decision that isn't the politician's decision, but is the people's decision. I know that many of you may think the Greens are a small party, but we are one of the fastest growing parties. In the last 12 months, we've gone from 13,000 to 57,000 members. That's a massive increase. And we are now have more members than the Lib Dems, so worth thinking about. First of all, with BSL, we're looking at inclusion, with communication for people who have perhaps poor literacy. We believe in making sure that information is accessible and that they are also able to be involved, and of course including sign language as well. So that's going to be mentioned in the manifesto. And our aim, and my aim, is to show you what we can do. And I think that the Green Party really can work with you. Of course, I've grown up in the deaf community, I've got deaf parents, and I've personally faced a lot of barriers and seen other people face those barriers. And the Greens are listening to me, they're listening to you, they listen to what I say, and they accept it. It's not rejected. And so I'm now feeling that in that way, my party is different from the others. Many parties collect information, the Green Party acts on it and does it to the benefit of deaf people and disabled people. Transsexuals, cross-gender, gay, lesbian, we have policies that cover all of the diversity. So it's about working together and the Greens becoming an increasingly growing, stronger party that I hope will one day form a mainstay of government. I think you will find the Greens a useful party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simeon. We're now going to have our first question from Natalia. Would Natalia like to stand up and ask her question?
I'm from Scotland. My name is Natalia. All around the world, we see there are many countries have recognized sign language. We also know that there are very many different sign languages around the world. When do we think we will get a BSL Act here in the UK? Thank you for your attention.
Gary, would you like to answer that first?
Yes, please. First of all, thank you for that question. It's very appropriate. Recently, as you know, I'm with UKIP, and I've been pressing for legal status of BSL to the UKIP policy makers. And at this moment, we're going through a whole raft of disability issues, which within a fortnight, the manifesto will be imminent. One of the major problems with BSL was the lack of qualified BSL interpreters, like for example at the doctors where deaf people can be misinformed or not clearly understood, causing misdiagnosis. So obviously it is very important that there is a life and death issue here. Now, those who know about BSL, it's been around since the 16th century, and like Welsh, Gaelic, it should not only be recognised as a language in its own right, but shouldn't have had legal status. Unlike the other regional languages, BSL is actually used nationally. It is obviously clear that the Equality Act is not working the way it should be, and that actually it's a large body of public opinion who want to see this work, and we want to actually, in the next parliament, start pushing politicians into recognising that BSL is the actual fundamental part of our community and our society, and it should be recognised as legal status. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Simeon.
The BSL Act We all know the process that's happening in Scotland, and we have our fingers crossed that this will go through, that this act will be enacted. And then certainly England and Wales should follow suit. There can't be excuses and delays. If Scotland manages to pass it, we simply should do the same. My question would be simple. Gaelic, there's legal recognition of that language. Welsh, the same, without question. There's no discussion about it. It's simply recognised. And yet the numbers are relatively small. Even Cornish has some legal recognition. BSL? Oh, no, well, later, maybe. BSL has been recognised, okay, but that's not enough. When people provide excuses about the legal issues and the expenses, well, the same issues apply for Wales and Scottish and so on, and yet the numbers are relatively small. There are far more BSL users. And the government says, but in fact there's very few BSL users. Well, it's just about placing barriers in front of us. And other communities are smaller than us. So we're quite clear that the BSL Act should and must be enacted. All this discussion about budgets, it's just finding excuses. The reality is implementing for many solutions will cost nothing, and some things will have some cost. In Finland, for example, they've implemented such recognition of sign language, and it's a fantastic example. Other countries around the world have done so as well. We are one of the countries with the richest and longest histories of democratic parliament, and yet we still haven't recognised BSL. The time is now, and the Greens, if we have MPs in parliament, will fight tooth and nail to have it enacted. We will. It should be done. And if in Parliament it's not done, where the other minority languages in England are recognised, then we will question that and challenge that and ask why. It's just about deaf people waiting later. Deaf people are always last. We're always at the bottom of the list of things to be done. Why should we wait any longer? It's simply wrong. The Greens want equality for everybody. No one should be waiting. In the new Parliament, I'm hoping that we progress with this issue and we have the BSL Act.
Mike?
Many people don't recognise the fact, in general, that BSL is a full language. It's not just a series of gestures. It's not just a sense of just simple communication. It is about the identity, the culture, and the heritage of deaf people. And the Liberal Democrats in September 2013, at their conference in Glasgow, passed a motion unanimously that the Liberal Democrats are committed to providing legal status for BSL. I come from Wales, and my language, when I was being brought up, that's the language of Welsh, was hardly spoken. It had been suppressed for many, many generations. Now it is spoken by at least 20% of our population of 3 million people. And I want to just tell you a little bit about how the language was developed, because it is exactly the platform which you're seeing in the Scottish Parliament at this moment as a starting point. And it is a starting point. When we first started to revive the language, what we did was to establish a way in which the public sector, to start with, had to say what they thought and how they would deal with the language. That is exactly how the Scottish Parliament is dealing with BSL now, providing a platform upon which public bodies have to describe how the language will be used. And if BSL is a language, then it has to have legal status and has to have official status within the UK, exactly in the same way as my language that I use in my country. And that language, by the way, has grown and strengthened, because what happened was that, first of all, you have to plan, You have to say how people will use it in public sector. That's the health service, that's in schools, and that's in government. Secondly, after that, you have to start promoting it. And now it is a compulsory subject in my country up until the age of 16 and right the way through. So there is no question in my mind that if it is a language, it deserves absolutely the right official status. If you are going to have official status, then the pathway you follow has been well described in the route march which we, in my country, have developed the Welsh language. So when I look for examples, I see it happening in Scotland, in the Scottish Parliament, as starting point, which was how we started 20 to 30 years ago in developing the first Welsh Language Act, and how it has progressed from there. People do not think twice now in my country about having a second language. It's for many people, as BSL is, not a second language, but a first language. It is the language which you use to communicate and create and to have your culture within. And therefore, it does seem to me that we are on the right pathway. But first of all, the political parties have to give a commitment that it should be a legal and official status, and you have that from the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mike. Kate?
Well, I'm very proud that it was a Labour government in 2003 that first recognised British Sign Language, and I recognise that people will feel that progress since then has been limited, and I think it's important that we understand why that is and what the right ways of addressing that problem would be. It seems to me that the question we have to ask is, what is the purpose of a piece of legislation like a BSL Act, and indeed what is the purpose of our policy in relation to BSL? Because, as I think has been acknowledged by Welsh language campaigners, you can pass all the legislation you like, but if you don't underpin that with actions and programmes for change, the legislation really is worth no more than the paper that it's written on. And it seems to me that we have two purposes that are talked about when we are discussing the idea of a BSL Act. One is about embedding access, equal access to services, to the opportunity to participate and communicate in everyday life. The other purpose is about culture, about identity, about embedding and recognising part of our shared cultural history in this country. And I am puzzled, genuinely puzzled, as to why the Equality Act at least cannot fulfil the first of those objects, because for me that is the purpose of the Equality Act across the piece, to ensure access, a level playing field, equality in the experience of all services and life experiences. The culture and identity purpose, however, I think is less well served by the Equality Act, and that's why I'm extremely interested to learn from the BSL legislation that is going through Scotland now, because it isn't obvious to me that that legislation will prove to be sufficient in addressing that cultural question, that identity question. It may, but it may not, and I think we have a great opportunity. One of the advantages of devolution in the UK is to learn from that Scottish experience. However, I don't want to have to sit around while we look at that legislation and learn and think about drawing up legislation if appropriate here. We could be beginning to put in place detailed action plans together now. And I hope that deaf people will work with the Labour government to do that across the piece. There are many steps that can be taken, and I'm sure we'll discuss the detail of some of them tonight, that do not and should not wait on legislation. We should be making these changes to deliver equality now.
Thank you, Kate. Are there any questions from the floor where people would like to put a question right now to one of the panelists? Over there.
Hello, my name is Marcina. I'm come from Poland, and I've got severe hearing loss. I wear hearing aids, and when I moved to this country, I had to learn English language. It was very hard progress for me, and I wanted to learn British Sign Language, but it was very difficult for me to do that. It's because I've got a little boy who I need to look after. I don't have a family to look after him, and usually the lessons are in the evening when my son is sleeping. Therefore, I would like to apologize that I don't do sign language. I really want to learn, but I'm finding it difficult, very difficult to access it, because I'm working also full time. So my question is, sorry, I'm just nervous. My question is, what are you doing in order to make it more accessible, please? Thank you.
Thank you,
Kate, what would you like to answer that first?
Thank you, Martina. I think you mean about making it more accessible to have education and learning opportunities, particularly perhaps for adults in BSL. And I think there are two things I would say that we should be thinking about much more imaginatively than we have done up until now. The first is about the opportunity for family learning, parents and children learning alongside one another. The idea that children will be properly supported to learn in the classroom, but particularly if they have hearing parents, or parents, as in your case, who are learning English as a second language and therefore BSL2 as a second language, should be excluded from that learning experience and given a second-class learning experience when you can manage to go to an evening class, is clearly going to be extremely damaging for family life, and damaging, in fact, for the child's development too, because the ability to have that full communication with a parent will be restricted. So I think we need to create many more opportunities for family learning. And that leads to the second thing I would say, which is that the opportunity to deliver that must be done in partnership between government, whether that's local government or national, and a very rich voluntary sector. And in my own home area of Trafford in Greater Manchester, we have had an excellent offer from an organisation called Genie Networks, which has focused on that family education, that family learning, which is a voluntary organisation, but working very closely with the local authority to design and offer classes. And that's something that I think we want to ensure that right across the country is being designed and implemented and offered, so that we can ensure that there is always availability of the opportunity to learn BSL for adults and for children together.
If you keep it brief, Mike, because we're
Okay.
very short of time.
Just to say two things, not to repeat all that Kate has said. Firstly, the provision of training for BSL training for adults is very patchy around the country. It depends on where you are, and depends on whether there's appropriate training available and the number of trainers, because of course there is a shortage of BSL trainers in some parts of the country to be able to train people. So it's very important that we try and get some uniformity of the system, so that somewhere near you there is available training. But if we reverse the situation from yourself, there is a situation where many deaf children are born to hearing parents. And if the hearing parents don't have BSL training themselves, they find it very difficult to communicate with their own children. So it's important that that should be within the family context as well, and that we should offer parents as well as children the opportunity to learn BSL as part of the way of communicating within and between family members. So this first question is, where do you find the provision? And we need to ensure that the provision is around the whole of the United Kingdom, not just in certain parts of the United Kingdom. And secondly, I think we need to make sure it's available for all the family.
Thank you. Simeon, do you have a few comments on that? But could you keep it brief, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. So two things. First of all, previously, colleges had many sign language classes, both day and evening, and through government cuts, colleges trying to manage their own funds independently, they've changed them to evening classes and closed down the day classes. Previously myself, I teach sign language, and I've tried to run them in daytimes, but you don't get sufficient students, and so as a business, that's not sustainable, and so you end up having to run them in the evening. So that's linked to cuts in college funding. And then also, you know, the Sure Start centres, which have been closed down. At that time, parents were very interested in accessing BSL support from the Sure Starts, but of course that was cut as well, and then it became too expensive for parents to access BSL tuition. So these are barriers which the government has put in place through budget cuts and not thinking through the consequences of those cuts. Now, I set up in Liverpool, just as one example, the Sign Language Fun Club. And parents found that difficult to access, so we eventually found a time, 7:15 to 7:45, just 1 hour, and it was incredibly well attended. And absolutely was said, it's both parents and children would come and sign together. And that was good fun. And that's something that I hope that deaf people could set up in their own areas. It's not always about formal classes, level 1 and level 2, where you have pressure to pass exams, but sometimes it's just about learning in a fun environment, parents and children together. And then later on, when people want to learn and take a more formal route, then they can. And of course, when you're running a fun club, £3 for adults, £2 for children, it becomes affordable as well. So there are ways of providing opportunities for people. But as I said, the Sure Starts was a key barrier in terms of cutting that, and also the reduction in funding for colleges. So I understand the difficulties you're having, and the solution, well, maybe deaf people need to be setting up their own businesses and providing access for deaf parents of hearing children and hearing parents of deaf children through a variety of learning methods, not just through formal classes.
Not wanting to keep repeating the same thing. I mean, I agree in everything that was said here, but I can say for myself, from my own experiences, is that I've recently did BSL level 2 of last year, and it was very difficult trying to find a suitable place, suitable location, suitable time. So, like some of the people here said, that it's very, very patchy, and yet we should have a much better uniform method of providing a BSL service throughout the country, instead of just bits and pieces as they are at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question now, and if the panellists could keep the answers rather short, because we've got through one question in just over half an hour, and there's many questions, as always. It's always like that. Penny, you have a question? Thank you. Brief answers.
Hi, my name is Penny. I'm from London. I'm a part-time teacher, and I'm currently working in a school as well as working in adult education. So I'm actually very pleased that the topic of adult education has already been raised this evening, because I think this is very important for us in the room, but also wider society as well. Now, my question relates to education and the education of deaf children. Very recently, we had some statistics published talking about deaf children in mainstream schools, and they were analysing GCSE results. Now, hearing children that come out of school with 5 A to C's at GCSE, we were looking at 65% of hearing children. Now, for deaf children, it's substantially less at 36%. Now, there are numerous reasons as to why that potentially is the case, but my question really is that, you know, as a teacher myself, please don't talk about the Children's Act. Please don't talk about statement of special educational needs. these are people that are making decisions. We have the new SEN Act that is coming through, but local authorities are still making cuts to their budgets. Now, I don't want to talk about that. I would like you to speak about how we can improve the education of deaf children. In schools, we have communication support workers who are being paid at an incredibly low level, beneath, or at least on a par sometimes, less than teaching assistants, who don't have the signing skills. Potentially they get to BSL level 3, but they are not supported in their career development in terms of signing. They are seen as learning support assistants rather than people that are there to facilitate communication. So in terms of deaf children getting exposure to clear, fluent language in schools, it's just not happening. Secondly, expectations are seemingly very low for deaf children. Schools don't seem to sit down and talk about the needs for deaf children. That's something that needs to very seriously be looked into. Now, I very much look forward to hearing your responses as to what you suggest we could do, because these children are your future voters.
Would you like to answer first, briefly?
Thank you, Penny, for your question. Education is so important. Inclusive education. I myself was a deaf teacher working in the mainstream, and I have to be honest, inclusive education simply didn't suit deaf children. Their needs are different because their needs are about communication. In a mainstream environment, the pace is too fast. The CSWs, how many CSWs are fluent enough to keep up with the classroom pace? So for example, I come from Liverpool, and they're using people signing at level 1 and level 2, and that with BSL schools, and that directly damages deaf children's educational opportunities. It is a massive problem. Now, I know this is slightly off the point, but research with one university that we're doing for the Green Party is about collecting evidence and case studies, because without that we can't really make the case to government. So we're trying to collect case studies around this issue, around the country, to provide that evidence. Now, you talked about the 36% success for GCSEs, but actually, how many of those were profoundly deaf BSL users? Because I think when I've talked to the NDCS saying how many people are in that percentage are BSL users, they don't know. In fact, that also includes people who are deaf children using English, children using cochlear implants, and so on. And the statistics aren't broken down. So actually, straightforward, the Green Party will consult with deaf professionals and deaf organisations about how to sort this problem out. Because at the moment, children with any education, to be honest, it's going back to the old days again, with a mass of problems, and we're looking at a future where deaf people grow up with depression. The Greens need to sort this out, and the government currently is simply not aware with their mantra of inclusive education and funding cuts. In America, they're starting to bring back and open up again the deaf schools because they've realised the mistake they made. So the Green Party will commit to talking to the BDA, Action on Hearing Loss, trying to find out the best solution for for deaf children.
Mike.
3 points. First of all, whether it's mainstream education or whether it's special schools, the difficulty you have, I think, is that some people would advocate one approach and other people would advocate the other. But I think it is very important that that choice is there for parents to make for their own children, whether they should have a special education or whether they should be in a mainstream school. And that is a decision I think parents should and be given the opportunity to make. I come back to the issue of the legal status of the language. If BSL had official legal status, as Welsh language did, then it also contributed to the increase of its use inside our curriculum. It is now a full part of our national curriculum and compulsory in Wales. So if it were a language with a legal status, then it would be taught within schools. It would be used within schools, in whether they are in mainstream or whether they would be in special schools. And that recognition means, of course, that you have to have BSL qualified teachers in schools being able to provide that education. Because one thing leads to another. If a language is that important, and if it is your first language, as well as being for some people their second language, if it's your first language, then it should be taught within schools, it should be part of the curriculum, and it should be the route for people, because at the moment there is such a huge lost opportunity for these children who are losing out in the lack of equality between mainstream and deaf children. It just cannot be allowed to continue, and it really ought to be a question of following through from that legal status for the language.
Thank you, Mike. Kate.
It's right that parents should make a decision about whether it's in the best interests of their child to be in mainstream education or specialist education. That must be a choice for parents and for families to make. But if children are being educated in special school settings, it's also important that opportunities are proactively created for children in special schools and children in mainstream schools to mix, to share learning as much as possible, to share and join together for activities. Because, of course, that enables the hearing children to become more familiar with and aware of the experiences of deaf children, and for deaf children to share and understand the experiences of hearing children. That's what life is like, it's what our education system needs to be like. Secondly, as I say, Labour wants to hardwire into our own education ambitions that they work for every deaf or disabled child. That means making sure, absolutely, Penny, that our aspirations for every disabled child, every deaf child, are as high as they are for a hearing child. It is unacceptable that teachers, that the system should consider it satisfactory that we should have such a discrepancy in GCSE and other academic indicators between deaf children and non-deaf children. And so we need to hardwire our expectations, our aspirations into the way in which we deliver our education system. One of the ways we do that is by ensuring that only properly qualified teachers and properly qualified support workers are allowed into our classrooms. It is a nonsense that the previous coalition government considered it would be acceptable for unqualified teachers to teach in free schools, and Labour will not have that. We also need to look at the design and presentation of the curriculum. We need to look at the design and presentation of the exam system, which may work as a barrier to equal treatment for deaf children in the school system. It's only if we think, how do we ensure that the level of attainment, the aspiration for our deaf children is the same as for any child, that we will design a system that delivers that. And that hasn't been the case so far in our education system. But I have to just take issue with you very slightly, Penny, that I think that the education, health and care plans should offer an opportunity to do that if we use them very proactively and aggressively. And I'd strongly, strongly urge parents and teachers to make the maximum use of them.
Thank you, Kate. Gary.
Well, first of all, in the 70s, I was talking about education. I went to a border school, to a border school for the deaf, and like many schools in those days, they actually believed that sign language should be discouraged deaf children to be made to speak. Because of that, I've actually missed out so much because of this restriction. But today, brilliantly, BSL is much more up to the fore. And the way I see it is that deaf children could be educated in what I call a bilingual environment, where language is obviously the way of we divide ourselves and human beings and learn about the world we live in. Because communication, language, be able to speak, be able to do sign language, opens so much opportunity for all of us. And of course, as I say, I repeat what a lot of people are saying, but it will help us, as deaf people, in creating better skills in grammar and in communication. Now, if you look at most of the world, I mean, the English people, British people have got very bad habits, but the rest of the world, they speak virtually 2 languages. It's very common. So it's very important for us as deaf people that we could be seen, that we can actually speak good English and BSL because that will improve so much for us in the rest of our lifetime, a lot of learning experiences. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Are there any other points that someone would like to make on this very important subject? I must tell you that we've got through the second question. We've only got an hour left, so please keep it very brief. Who is burning to ask a question on this? Is there one person burning? All right. You look burning to me.
Hi, my name is Ben. I have to say that a frustration that is shared amongst deaf people in the UK is that we have maybe 50,000 deaf BSL users. We don't have a deaf MP to vote for. We have all of these different parties, which is fine. We're split up in lots of different constituencies across the UK, which is fine. But what we can't do is come together as one collective group of 50,000 people. Now, my question to you on the panel is, do you agree that the election process itself needs to change? It needs to be more representative of people's lives in the UK.
Okay, thank you very much. That wasn't to the point about education, so if you could keep the answers very brief so we can move on to the next question. Okay.
Okay. I don't think it's so much the election process that needs to change as the selection process. Political parties select candidates, and if the parties do not select candidates from a diverse range of backgrounds, then you will not have a diverse parliament. Now, we have in the last parliament, the parliament that has just completed, had a very good thing, the Access to Elected Office Fund, which was set up by a speakers committee of all the different political parties agreeing that there needed to be a fund to support disabled potential parliamentary candidates with going through the internal process of selection. And I want to see that fund repeated in the next parliament. I think it's very important. But I also think it's important that parties examine their own internal processes to ensure that they are attracting and supporting and promoting a diverse range of potential candidates. And I think that's the answer, rather than thinking that the answer can be sorted by changing something about how Parliament is elected.
Right, Mike, if you'd like to take a very brief point.
I absolutely agree with everything that Kate has said, but it is about the way our political system works. It won't surprise you, as a Liberal Democrat, that I'm in favour of proportional representation, which in other countries allows for a much more diverse way of people being able to spread their votes around. So that's a promise that we will try and keep, but that's the one that I think that makes a difference.
Is there one more person here who has a question about education? Because deaf people at school is clearly very important. Would you like to, that gentleman there, specifically on education? He's got to ask a question.
Hello, everyone. Now, I am very interested in asking a question about education. Now, I have two boys, one aged 8, one aged 6. They're both hearing. I'm obviously a deaf father. Now, I was looking for a school that would provide the very best education for my children. Now, it seems that schools focus primarily on English, maths and science as core subjects. But I would like there to be further subjects and more of a focus on a wider curriculum as well. Now, my other child is not profoundly deaf, but he has had glue ear. And when he went for his assessment, he had to do his phonetic test to ensure that he was speaking age appropriately. Now, he wasn't. He wasn't because of his glue ear condition. Now, again, he's had real troubles in terms of accessing his curriculum at school, largely because the main focus seems to be specifically on English and maths, rather than having a holistic, inclusive curriculum where other skills are valued equally. Now, English and maths is important, but it is very important that we have a more global approach to our education. Okay. I'd be very interested in hearing your comments.
Let Simeon answer that.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for your question. certainly in terms of holistic education, it's the national curriculum. It should cover, and it does cover, all these subjects, but of course it focuses at the moment on the 3 areas you talked about. And there's lots of arguments about SATs and the different assessment mechanisms that there are. So education seems to be left aside whilst people just focus on sorting out English, maths and science. And how many years have we been talking about this? In terms of the Green Party, we'd be really keen on resolving these issues, but it's about looking at education for everyday life. And of course, English is really important, but so is engineering. And engineering and science are different. Everyday life is different to these subjects. So it's how you access all of these subjects for everyday life, and not so narrowly, because otherwise, I remember going through school and then getting my qualifications, but ending up with a completely different job, because it depends on society and the opportunities for you. And you need to follow a broad education to give you the broadest opportunities and choices in life, not just English and maths.
Thank you very much. Gary, have you got something you'd like to contribute to this?
I absolutely agree that we should have a much wider, broader spectrum when it comes to education. And one of the things I keep pointing out with school leavers, but when they leave school, a lot of them seem to be unable to know how to fill in a CV, and yet coming towards the end of their education, it's one of the fundamental things they had to learn was how to fill in like a job description and so on. And it seemed to be just focusing on just a few items, and then say, well, good luck, off you go, and see what you can find for yourself. So I actually agree, we need a much broader spectrum of education.
Right, thank you. Is there any other point on education which we haven't covered, or can we move on to the next? I think we'll move on to the next question, which is more mainstream, or is that all right? Andrew, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew. I represent the deaf community perspective to politics. I'd like to bring up a question relating to Europe and immigration. It's really been a hot topic for discussion and concern. What are the policies of the panel on immigration, firstly? And secondly, can we afford to pull out of the European Union? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Kate, would you like to be the kick-off?
I'm very lucky to have represented in the last Parliament, and I hope in the next Parliament, a very, very diverse constituency with many, many different ethnic communities. Some who arrived many, many decades ago, some who are arriving even now. The Somalis, for example, are very recent arrivals in our community and very, very valuable members of our neighbourhood. And that enriches our neighbourhood. It's not without its challenges as people learn to adapt and understand different cultures and experiences, and some people have arrived from very traumatic and conflicted histories at home, but it certainly makes for a very vibrant, a very rich and a very friendly neighbourhood, and one I would be absolutely devastated to lose. Immigration is good for our country, it's part of our history, and it's important that we applaud and celebrate what has been for many, many centuries a strong, diverse country, and I don't want that to stop. I do think we have to make sure that everybody, whether newly arrived, here for 2 or 3 generations, or here for many, many centuries, has the opportunity to be treated fairly and equally. It is disgraceful, for example, that employers have used the arrival of recent migrants to undercut wages. Labour will people whether they have newly arrived here or who are always here, should expect only to take from society without putting in. And that's why we will say that there should be contribution qualifications for benefits and social security and access to public services, but that's got to be balanced with a compassion and a recognition that when people need support, and it could be any of us anywhere, that support will be available to them.
Thank you,
Is Europe good for us? Yes, it is good for us. It's our major trading partner, and it's absolutely vital that we stay at the centre of it, at the table, having our voice heard as one of the most powerful voices in deciding Europe's future. That won't continue if we walk away. And as disabled people, you will know that it's not just the economic benefits. Europe has delivered good social progress to us, good employment rights, and good rights for disabled people that we've adopted in the UK too.
Right, very good. Gary, I think you might have a different point of view.
Well, I like to say I'm absolutely gobsmacked at Labour's total reversal of their immigration policy. After all, it was the Labour Party who contributed so much to the problem we have today, and now to take bits and pieces of our policy and claim it as their own. Anyway, so I think a lot of people here would say they have a good idea what UKIP stand for, but let me put the focus on immigration. We are not a racist party. We don't care what colour you are. We don't care where you come from. But all that we care about is that when people do come here, that you actually contribute to this country. And you actually have a salary, and you work, and you pay taxes. It's not about if we're from Somalia or Africa or Europe. It is important, and especially we favour very much an approach to having people from the Commonwealth, because we actually believe in the Commonwealth, because we believe that this country's destiny is not just Europe, which is just a small collective of small countries whose combined economy is actually slowly shrinking. But we should be actually linking ourselves with some of the fastest growing economies in the world, and that's in the Commonwealth. So, first of all, we talk about immigration. How do we control it? Well, we will have a point system, very much like they have in Australia and New Zealand, where we judge people by what they can contribute. So we need engineers. We don't care about a cap. What we care about is having the people to do the job we want. That, for example, we haven't got enough nurses. We want nurses to come here. We don't care where you come from. We want you to fulfil that gap in this country. Now, the other issue is about welfare and benefits. Now, UKIP believe that after an immigrant being here, wherever they come from, should pay taxes and contribute for 5 years before they can actually take advantage of the welfare benefit system, of which is one of the most generous in the world. And of course now we hear about the Labour Party. I want to actually gobsmack it here, Miliband. I mean, it said, I'll quote it here, that they would actually prevent immigrants from having welfare or benefits after 2 years or something like that. And then the Conservatives come out and say, oh yeah, we'll do the same thing, 4 years. And I thought, look, ladies and gentlemen, if you want fake UKIP, vote for them. But if you want the real people, the real party that really put our interests, our country first, then vote UKIP, not these pretend parties. Thank you very much.
Mike.
Of course, it's right that we should not ask people to come here when they want to receive benefits and take our welfare system as their primary right. That is not what immigration is about. I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to answer the question which was put to us, which is basically, is European immigration a good or bad thing? And I've just said that there is some immigration which has taken place, which has been about benefits, which is not good. But the vast majority of people coming here have been coming here to benefit our economy and have been coming here to help us. if you look at the actual statistics, and those people who decry these should look at the baseline, which is where and how that's helped our economy. Since the year 2000, more people, European immigrants have contributed far more in taxes than they received in benefits. They've relieved the fiscal burden on this United Kingdom because they had their education elsewhere. So that's £6.9 billion of immigration education money, which we haven't had to pay. And since the year 2000, European immigrants who arrived in the UK have contributed more than 20 billion to the UK's public finances. They have by far the better way of giving us back into this community. And if we want to have people, and we are welcoming as a society, and we are welcoming to people who want to contribute to our economy, then that is just as good as UK citizens wanting to go and live and work in other parts of the European Union. And that's why that is so important. We should not forget that there are people in this country who've come here and have contributed to our economy, and that is a positive for us, not a negative. And that's the reason we should not be out of the European Union, because why do we want to turn on our backs on the biggest economy where we sell most of our goods, when what you will be putting up is a wall between us and the rest of the European Union, and we'll have to be paying extra in order to be able to sell our goods into the European Union.
Thank you, Mike. Simeon, could you keep it brief?
First of all, immigration. The statistics from UCLAN, from UCL, from 2000 to 2011 are quite shocking. In terms of immigration, people paying taxes, as they said, 20 billion. Far more than has been paid to immigrants in benefits. So it's a business case for having strong immigration. People working here are keeping British businesses going. Now, when we're talking about Europe, whether we should be in or out, the Greens feel we should be in Europe and we should carry on. There are lots of benefits. So, for example, you know that we pay 9 billion, but we have a European social fund which pays us back in many different ways. So there are many different ways that whilst it's part of an active economy and the money goes around. It's not just that we put the money into Europe. So let me give you one example. Liverpool, which was in a state of real deprivation. In 2008, we won the City of Culture Award, and the money from that came from Europe. Now it's one of the most beautiful cities compared to 30 years ago. Where did that money come from? Europe. Now, in 2017, we want to have a referendum, and the reason is we think it is people's right to say. The government can't decide for the people on this, whether we should be in or out of Europe. You are voting for the government, and it's your right to vote whether we should continue in or out of Europe. However, the Green Party's perspective would be that we would hope that the vote would be that we should stay in Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And, sorry, just my last point. Because, of course, one major issue for deaf people is the human rights. And if we were to leave the Europe, then we would lose that link with the the UN.
Who would like to contribute? Have you got a question? A question, not a point.
Sorry, my name's Peter. I'm from Derby, where there is a very large deaf community, probably the largest outside of London. You know, I'm a carer, my wife is involved. I'm a governor of a school for the deaf. I'm part of the deaf community. So people constantly talk about Europe and immigration. I'm not being racist here, but I feel second class. I've got problems, and yet the priority seems to be on immigrants. You know, I'm here. You know, I feel as though as a deaf person, I'm a second-class citizen. I've seen it in education, in health. I've seen it all over, all the time I see this. So please sort it out.
Kate, what's your answer to Peter?
course, what we can't be doing is accepting poor quality standards for people who are here, whether that's in health or in education or in dilution of rights. But let's be clear, most migrants to this country, economic migrants, particularly from Europe, are young single men. They don't make any use of our education system because they don't have children and they've had their education at home. They don't make much use of our NHS, in fact they're quite likely to be working in it, because they are healthy, young, fit men. So I don't think the answer to your perfectly correct concerns, Peter, about poor access to public services for people in many parts of our country as a result of spending cuts, I don't think the answer to that is to say that immigrants are getting a better deal. They're having a very different experience in most cases in this country. They're of a different age, of a different background. They're here for a fixed period of time to do something in particular. And I think that it's very dangerous to start to say that we're pitting one group against another group. That makes for a very divided country. And I think you're sort of agreeing with me there. I see you nodding at what, or looking as if I'm, misrepresenting what you say, in which case that's good.
He does think you're misrepresenting.
Okay, good. Sounds like we agree then.
You don't agree. Let me ask Mike, I think this is the point that Peter's asking. In Tower Hamlets, not far from here, there are classes with children from 20 different countries speaking 20 different languages, and white children feel discriminated against. That is a major issue in London. What, Mike, would you suggest is the answer to that?
The basis upon which, as a society, we all must work is that we must understand each other, we must be compassionate towards each other, we must respect each other, and we must give everyone self-esteem. Those are the points I started this debate with. And if you feel, Peter, a second-class citizen, then that is the fault of us politicians for not giving you the chances that you would like and that you need and you think you should have in life. That's the issue which we are discussing here today, I think. Not about bringing everyone, making everybody feel that they have not been treated or that other people have been treated better than you, but to ensure that you are treated well and that you are treated by the rest of our society in a way which you would appreciate to be treated yourself. Now, to make that happen, we have to understand more. We have to understand each other better. My daughter used to teach in a school with 17 nationalities, and I visited the school very often in the centre of Cardiff. And what happened was that she had to learn with children who couldn't speak any English, but she used all the community spirit that she could find around her to ensure that people understood the interests of each other. And that's the way that we as a society have always operated. We have tried to find out. We've been interested in other people. We've been interested in other people's difficulties. We have tried to overcome those difficulties. And it's as a community of communities is the only way we as a society will benefit.
Right, thank you. Is there anyone else with a burning question on this?
Well, let me explain. I mean, the big problem is, as you're not alone, I could say that, is the sheer numbers of people coming here at such a very short space of time. For example, governments and local councils, they plan ahead, determined by the natural population growth in their area. And they could say, right, we'll need so many houses here, or doctors, or hospitals, so on. That's how it makes sense, But then when you suddenly have a huge number, you can't plan the number of houses to build. You can't plan the number of hospitals or doctors. The whole thing starts to unravel.
Right. Okay. Last word for Simeon, but please brief.
When you're talking about feeling like a second-class citizen, you mean as a deaf person, don't you? Okay, I understand you. I think that's a good point. If I go back to the discussion on the BSL Act, that's a simple solution. If I go to hospital and I have problems in accessing because interpreters aren't provided, and then we have to make do, and then I see two people from different countries and they get interpreters, do I blame the people who are getting interpreters? No, I blame the government. It's because they're not enforcing the policies that they should be having. Why would I blame another group of vulnerable people? It's the government who don't provide for us. And when we're wondering about, and Kate is saying, what will happen with the BSL Act, the point is that the hospital should be required to give me a BSL interpreter.
Okay. Thank you very much, because the question is about immigration, not other. Let's move on to the next. I think we're going to get
so
there.
I just need to finish interpreting, sorry. And if France and Germany manage their immigration, where their immigration levels are much higher, then so should we be able to.
Okay, let's move on to, I think this question will go on and on and on. So let's move on to Nadia's question, please. Is Nadia here? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadia from Brighton. I'm deaf, I'm a woman, and I'm a British Asian, born and brought up here. But when I see the community of deaf Asian women, I think they feel doubly discriminated against. Okay, you've talked about the BSL Act, but let's see, if you're deaf, you're discriminated against, but if you're an Asian woman, you have poor access to education. What kind of provision are you going to make for deaf Asian women in education and employment?
Thank you. Gary, what will UKIP do for Nadia?
I think it's absolutely wrong that anyone here should be discriminated against for whatever background they come from. And, you know, it's like the same old story. The government had been neglected in providing for. I mean, it's their job to look after our society, look after community. And I think you're not unusual, because I feel that when I was growing up, you know, the people used to discriminate me because of being deaf. I can understand that. The thing is, there has to be a greater awareness and understanding amongst all groups of people that we all share the same world, we all share the same country, and we all have to work together. And I think it's important that people like yourself should never be left out in the first place.
Okay, Gary, thank you. Kate, does that answer your question as well? Is Gary convincing you?
The issue for Asian women, and particularly deaf Asian women, is not uniform. Younger women, for example, are participating to a very considerable extent in education. Many are going on into further and higher education. Older women, particularly from Pakistan and Bangladeshi backgrounds, are very, very isolated and suffer the worst employment, health and education outcomes. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, even within the Asian community in Britain, even among women in the Asian community in Britain, even among deaf women in the Asian community in Britain. We need a very, very variated set of strategies to tackle that endemic discrimination, and it is discrimination. This is leaving such disgracefully poor outcomes for so many of those women. And whether that's in ensuring that the education system properly meets the needs of those women, which it doesn't at the moment, ensuring that we tackle employer discrimination, ensuring that we have culturally appropriate childcare and family care, because many of these women are stuck at home providing all the family care. These are the challenges that governments should be addressing and have not, in truth, been adequately addressed in recent years. But it's only if we have a very sophisticated set of strategies, not just government ought to be doing something, but actual actions that recognise those different life experiences, that we will begin to tackle that endemic injustice and bring about true equality.
Thank you, Kate. Mike, have you got a brief point on this?
Yeah, just one thing to say. What a splendid question, Nadia. You know, the solution lies obviously in ourselves and the politicians we have around us. But if you're going to energise and make change, and I believe passionately that people can make change, then you need to build up the community of people who share those interests and challenge and take on the people who are actually stopping you from doing the things which you think are important. I had a very powerful group of Pakistani women in my former constituency who formed themselves into a community group, who undertook lots of training which they organised for themselves, and the local authority, local council gave them support in order to provide that training. But then they took on the power brokers in their community. They actually asked people and they challenged people. So whilst it may be possible to have a national plan, what I think is most important is that we have community action, local communities working together. And I would only encourage you to find others and challenge the politicians in your community to come up with the solutions which make the difference for where you live. Because that's the only way you're going to really get major change, by challenging them on the spot.
Okay, does that answer your question? Paul, have you got a question now? I'll come to you later. Paul? Have we got a question from Paul?
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm from London, from Newham specifically. I'm chair of the Deaf Forum there. Now, my question to the panel is about mental health issues, actually. We're seeing a lot of inequality in mental health. We are seeing cuts left, right and centre from central government. Now, with the National Health Service, do you have a plan for provision moving forward, and what does that provision look like?
Simeon, have you got an answer for this? Nothing about it.
Certainly the NHS at the moment, in relation to mental health services, well, I think we have to think about deaf people mental health issues, because we know that there's a disproportionate rate of mental health issues with deaf people, 4 times the hearing average. And for deaf people, that's a real struggle. There simply isn't enough funding for mental health services. So linked to that question, that's part of the problem. Myself, I've been involved in caring in care services as a care service, and it's simply impossible to see the number of deaf clients, because what you need is people who are able to provide services in British Sign Language, not just using interpreters. And of course the problem is the government simply doesn't recognise the issue or know what to do with it. When you look at deaf people and mental health outcomes, we need more deaf mental health professionals who are able to work with deaf people to improve health outcomes, and that will reduce the overall budget, because at the moment, without dealing with this issue, it just means the budget will have to increase to deal with all the mental health issues that aren't sorted out.
Very good. Mike?
I'm in the fortunate position of being able to tell you what will be on the front page of our manifesto, only because it was published about 10 days ago. And on the front page of our manifesto, it will say as one of our 5 key issues, we will invest £8 billion in the health service, which is what it needs in order to be able to survive. That was the figure for England, so that we can guarantee equal care for mental health. So it is a top promise from us in this general election that we will find the resources in order to be able to provide equal care for mental health. It has been in the past the Cinderella. It has been the problem lurking in the corner. It has been the problem which has faced so many people in our society. The link between mental health and other conditions has been so dramatic, and yet we have not yet dealt with it. And we believe that it is one of the major things that we need to tackle in our society if we are to tackle a more equal approach to the way we work together. So mental health, and that means through the health service, through recognising it through all of our public services, through the education system, and not only recognising it, but having the resource to be able to deal with it, is a crucial part of our commitment to the British public in this general election.
Thank you, Mike. Kate, would you like to?
It's particularly scandalous that such a very small proportion of the mental health budget is spent on children and young people, because most mental health problems have their roots in childhood and begin to emerge, or some of the drivers of adult mental health problems come from childhood and adolescent experience. And yet the spending on child and adolescent mental health services is a tiny, tiny proportion of the already very squeezed and cut mental health budget. So Labour is committed to rebalancing that, to getting a significant amount of spend shifted into child and adolescent mental health services so that we start to address the problems early and to make sure that particularly children who are at greater risk of isolation and of poor mental health, and that does include some deaf children, get early intervention so that those problems do not build up and manifest themselves more severely in childhood.
Thank you, Kate. Gary, what's UKIP's position on this?
Well, I'd like to hear that the Liberal Democrats are committed to £8 billion to the national health over a period of 5 years. In our recent manifesto, we said that we'll actually put £3 billion per year. And actually that money, we've costed that money from reducing the cost of foreign aid from £12 billion per year to just £3 billion per year. Now you might think, oh, that's a big reduction, but £3 billion per year for foreign aid is 3,000 million, so that's a huge amount of money. Anyway, so okay, with that amount of investment every year, we'll be able to meet head-on some of the problems that we've had with the National Health Service, and in particular in West London, when I heard about the cutting down or cutting back A&E services, that we will go and reverse that. So it's going to be a long, ongoing process, and that's something that the money will be there from UKIP, and we're committed to spend it. Thank you very much.
Right, the question is about mental health and the bad provision on mental health. And I just wonder if anyone else has got a question for the panel on that specific issue, the problems. Yes, madam.
Hello, everyone. I think we need to focus on the cause of mental health problems. I think deaf children have suffered in education, in their lives, in their upbringings because of barriers. That is what leads largely to unemployment, isolation, the A to Z that everybody in this room knows about. Now, primarily, that's primarily about British Sign Language. And I have to say I was disappointed with the panel's response on British Sign Language. I didn't see a commitment to British Sign Language, because that would solve all of our problems. Now, something that Gary has said, you know, we have to look after the whole community. Now, I hope that includes immigrants as well.
Kate, you're being criticised. Have you got a reply to that?
I'm sure that British Sign Language is a very important feature of resolving problems and addressing barriers. But life is complex, and any party that comes forward with one policy and one policy only is not adequately meeting your needs, and I don't think any of us are. I'm very heartened by what you say about immigrants. It's good to have people who are prepared to speak out about what they believe. And I also agree with you that the isolation that deaf children, young people, and indeed deaf adults experience as a result of the language barriers that are in their way is a major contributor to poor mental health. But I don't think that it's a one-club solution, frankly. I think we need a very, very rich range of policies and strategies to address that isolation.
Kate, I think the question really is of the audience. They feel that they want to know whether a Labour government would make a commitment to support BSL, yes or no?
I think, no, that's not what we were asked, actually, I don't think, because everybody is prepared to support BSL. The issue is about the instrument by which you do it. Is that through a BSL Act, or is it through some other mechanism? And what I've said is I'm very willing to look at the benefits, the pluses and minuses of legislation, but legislation on its own, without action plans and without a clear sense of purpose, will not deliver the outcomes that we need. And that's why I'm committed to examining the lessons from Scotland, to working with deaf people to look at what the right strategies and priorities are, and not hang around waiting for a slot in the legislative timetable in what might be a very busy Parliament to make sure that we can start to make progress.
All right. Mike, what would the Lib Dems do on that?
Well, I think I'm very sorry that I didn't actually tell you enough about the BSL Act. We passed a motion, that's the Liberal Democrat policy, that we should give legal status to BSL. And that means that with that comes with it the official status of a language. Right. And all the things that follow from that. all of which impact upon education, they impact upon the public services and the sector. What I did by using my example of the Welsh language was simply to show you how a language has to start on a journey where even though it may be recognised officially, it still has to be a journey. And what you're seeing is the first steps of that journey with the BSL legislation in Scotland, which is the right approach, but it won't be the end of the journey, but it is the correct approach, and it's something that Liberal Democrats have already supported.
Thank you, Mike. Very briefly, Simeon.
I understand your point. And we have a commitment to BSL as the Green Party, but let me say a bit more about that. Again, looking at mental health and deaf children, it's abuse. It is abuse. The government has done nothing to change this over time. And that abuse is to do with sign language. We have to go back to the issue of the BSL Act. If we have that, then what follows from that would mean that mental health issues would be reduced. It would have appropriately qualified deaf teachers, deaf teaching assistants, people able to access sign language in the classroom. And of course, the lack of that is what leads to stress and mental health issues.
Right.
So the Green Party, I have to say, will campaign and we will fight for legislation. Kate has said, well, we will see what we can do. The evidence is there already that the language needs to be recognised.
Okay.
And so as a magistrate, you understand the system. But I think in the real world, we know that we need this now.
Gary?
And that's why we will support the BSL Act to make it legislation.
Right. Thank you very much.
It will happen, not just for deaf children, but also for adults in terms of the provision of services, and to ensure that communication is there in employment, education, and so on. So whether it's level 1, level 2, and level 3, in terms of BSL qualifications, we want to make sure that people are appropriate qualified for the different situations they're in.
Well done. Gary?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that personally I've actually been in contact with UKIP policymakers regarding pressing for the recognition and legal status of BSL. So that is very good. And that. So we should about in a fortnight time get the positive response in a manifesto when it be released. I'm a bit concerned about this experiment going on with Scotland. Now, it's not the first time Scotland has been used as an experiment when Scotland was used for the poll tax. If it goes wrong, well, we won't adopt it, or if it goes right, we'll adopt it. So I don't know why, but people like to use Scotland as a test bed. And like I say, I can understand why the Scots feel the way they do. They're had enough of being used as a guinea pig. And I think we should actually, I mean, BSL have been around for a long time. Let's grow up. We need it here. We need it as soon as possible to get it through Parliament in the next 5 years and get it sorted out.
Right, thank you very much. Herbert Klein has a question. Herbert?
Hello, my name is Herbert Klein. I'm from London. I work in mental health services. I brought in just at the last minute, but I do have a question for you here. You'll be aware that the government is planning to cap the access to work budgets. And deaf people who need access to work support to enable them to climb the career ladder are being blocked from securing their career hopes. And that is a bad model for younger deaf people and younger deaf children who may be studying at university but may fear that they will never be able to achieve the jobs that they strive for and hope for because there's no access to work support available for them. So what is their future? What are their chances of promotion? Can I ask the panel what your views are about the services of access to work and the potential cap on funding for individual deaf people?
Mike, would you like to start?
I think you've got to treat the issue of how this announcement was made and when it was made with some care and caution, because there should have been a response to the Select Committee's report on access to work. And I'm not in the centre of government, so I'm able to make my own judgment. But I would judge that the fact that we didn't get that response means that there has been some disagreement between the coalition parties as to how that response and what that response should be. In terms of the £40,800 cap on using access to work, I think this has to be viewed with a great deal of caution, because clearly what you have to do is to ensure that there is appropriate support in order for people to get more into work and to remain in work. Now, if you can do that with a different mechanism, if that can be achieved by getting different approaches to make that work in some way, well, fair enough, I'm prepared to accept that. But I'm not prepared to accept people's opportunities being reduced and lessened. In fact, what I think should happen is that we need to have more opportunities in access to work. There need to be more chances for more people to take advantage of it. It hasn't been picked up by employers in a way which it should be. It needs more promotion. It needs more attention by employers. It also needs more people to take it up, particularly people, of course, with mental health problems and mental health issues. Now, to do that, we either need to increase the budget, or we alternatively spread the budget around more thinly. I would hope that we would see an extension to the budget. It may not be a grand extension in the very first few years, but I think we want to see the direction of travel, that we want to see an extension of the access to work budget. And I would approach the cap with great caution indeed, but I would remain to be convinced that it can be achieved within that 40,800 cap.
Thank you, Mike. Gary, what's UKIP's position on this?
Well, first of all, I've worked in deaf job clubs and helping deaf people find meaningful employment. And one of the things I find is that so many are completely unaware of access to work. But not only that, but also employers are totally unaware of access to work. Now, knowing about access to work is very important, but when I had people referred to me from the job centre, even the job centre were unaware of the benefit of access to work. And even I've had information for people at the actual department of WP, or DTP, there was a lack of awareness over there. So, yeah, there's a couple of things we've got to think about is that access to work must be made clearly to all, and its benefits to those who are seeking employment or those who are in jobs, and to help employers to understand what it means to them and what it means to hire a disabled person, because many employers, by human nature, they think, you know, I wonder how much it will cost me. But access to work, it help a lot to overcome that.
But Gary, would you increase the amount of money or not?
I think, I'd say, I'm not sure there should be a cap, because you see, different disabled people have different needs. There might be someone who might need a lip speaker or a note taker or someone to transport. How could you cap that? Because otherwise you ended up with small part-time people doing virtually nothing and not be able to meet the requirement of that particular disabled person to meet their obligation in their job, so what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, let's just ask Mike. I mean, you're a member, ex-member of the coalition. Did you protest when you heard about the cap?
Well, since it was only announced in the last week, and this was the point I was making about, the last week or 10 days, right at the fag end, virtually the last day of the Parliament, and there had been no discussion about, I had not heard any discussion about what was going to be in the announcement. In fact, Kate and I were on a panel with Mark Harper, and we asked him, and I asked him, when he was going to make his announcement. And we are told that the report would come out in the next Parliament. And I think that report is still to come out. So I think there is still a degree of flexibility in the way we approach this matter in this general election.
Thank you. Okay, Simon, your last word.
Access to work is a really hot topic. I've had problems myself, but I won't talk about that. The Greens the Green Party wants to increase Access to Work's budget. The 40,800 cap. If a deaf person is working part-time, is working part-time, that's enough money. 2-3 days a week, not a problem. However, if they're working full-time, 40,800 may well not cover the needs. It depends on their workload. Of course, if they're working, self-employed, running their own business 24/7, 40,800 is never going to cover their access needs. And if they're going to compete with hearing businesses, phoning at all times and so on, so deaf people want to run their own businesses and compete on an equal basis, the 40,800 is a barrier. The solution? Well, first of all, assessments need to be done properly. And people need to be put into categories so that the amount of money provided to them matches their needs. That in fact it doesn't become a barrier. People who are working 24/7, then they need flexible funding. People who are working 5 days a week, they need funding appropriate to their needs. It's about making sure that deaf and disabled people are able to work without stress on an equal basis to hearing people. Because we've just talked about mental health issues, it shouldn't be more of a challenge for deaf and disabled people than for hearing people to work. Now, the 40,800, if I was to be voted in and become a deaf MP, I couldn't work for that. I couldn't manage my access needs for that amount of money. I might be getting through 4 interpreters a day, 12-hour days. The government doesn't even recognise a deaf MP's needs, and the Access to Work budget wouldn't even cover that. So Access to Work has to look at the deaf person, their needs, and the idea of a single cap is simply nonsense. And what that means is that the government needs to put money into the budget and not spend more because of the consequences of blocking deaf and disabled people being able to work.
We'll take one burning question and then we're going to have the summing up. Would you like to? Could you keep it? Could you keep it brief, though, please?
My name is Michael. What happens is the government give 1% for access to work to encourage people to have their support in employment. But we then give 1.48% back to the government. The government's making money out of us. So I don't know why they want to cap it.
Well, Michael's right. Liz Sace's report showed that for every pound spent on access to work, the Exchequer benefited to the tune of £1.48. And the previous government were beginning to dispute that figure, but they never demonstrated convincingly that their figure, which they seemed to have plucked out of the air, was more credible. I think there is a real issue about the cap, as there was about the 30-hour rule that preceded it. It is a cap on aspiration. It is a limitation on people's careers. I think there are also problems about attitudes in the Access to Work team, an attitude of saying no rather than of saying yes. How can we use Access to Work to facilitate people's participation? I think there are process problems, and I think that as we are told that this cap will not take effect till 2018, we should take a big step backwards and go in and, working with deaf people, carry out a proper root and branch review of how we make Access to Work effectively to support everyone's career aspirations.
Yeah, I don't dispute. I think we should stand back, and we've got this time and this space. And if the report of the Select Committee were to be responded to correctly, then it would take that time. And there are people currently working with government and with officials to try and look at the sorts of solutions which might be appropriate. Those discussions have to continue, and they should continue. And I found it very strange that there was this sort of artificial cap put in place before the discussions had ended. So my view is we'll stand back, we'll think about it, and we need to think much more carefully about how we approach individual needs, maybe doing things differently. There's no problem at all with doing things differently, providing that we meet the needs and also that we get more and more people being able to use access to work so they can get into the workplace.
Gary, have you got in 1 minute a solution of you?
I mean, I agree exactly what being said here, but I think when it comes to the Department of Work and Pension, they tend to get too focused on what they're doing in their department and not look back, I'd say, and see the much bigger picture. I mean, it's obvious. Now, for every £1 you invest, you get £1.48. I mean, it's a no-brainer. So, I don't know why this happens all the time.
Well, we've got to the situation where the whole panel agrees with each other, which isn't the intention. So let's try and show how they all disagree with each other now. And I'm going to ask them each to summarise what their position is, and either you'll keep it to about 2.5 minutes each, 3 minutes would be very helpful. Shall we start with Gary? Do you want to start, Gary? Would you like to start to summarise?
Well, summarise, well, they're very difficult questions after. I mean, we seem to agree with each other so much in that. There is a very important election coming. It's got to be big, and there'll be massive changes. No one, not if the Green, the Lib Dem, the Labour, and the absolute Conservatives, were actually going to tell you what the outcome of the next election. I think it's quite exciting, really, because for the first time, your vote will actually start to make a difference in wherever you are and wherever you live. And I could say, what decision you make now will make a big difference, not just for yourself in the next 5 years, but the direction this country is going to go for the next 10 and 20. So think seriously about where we're going, where do you want to go. And I could say, for me, I mean, I'm from UKIP. I love my country. I grew up in my country. And I love people to be able to work together, no matter whatever background we come from, that we all contribute together. And we live in really exciting times. Thank you.
Simeon.
Discussion from the Green Party perspective. If you want change, it's the time for change. Vote Green. Maybe you're thinking, well, the Greens only have one MP so far. Well, let it grow then. Why not? When it grows, it means that other political parties will have the problem. Because the Greens are a broad spectrum of people working together. And as I said, we have empathy. It means that we can represent the different communities, the different perspectives. We represent the real world. We're not just politicians. It's about seeing things as they are, and I have to say that for the other parties, they are professional politicians. They don't really live in the real world. The Green Party is the party that you should vote for. We will be the best party. In 5 years, we've had one MP, Caroline Lucas, and she has already had a massive impact in Parliament. But the media doesn't focus on what she's managed to achieve, it focuses on the other issues. And the media doesn't reflect accurately what the different parties have done, and particularly what Caroline Lucas has achieved. So she has made a big difference, particularly in the NHS. If you're considering voting Green and supporting us to grow as a party, then take the SNP as an example and look at the exponential growth they've experienced. That's what can happen with the Greens too. We have younger group, we have women's groups, we have deaf, and I've just set up the Deaf Green Party group as well. Because again, we are representing people who live in the real world. So vote Green.
Mike, would you like to summarise?
I sometimes object to being called a professional politician. I spent all but 10 years of my working life doing a real job and working job, And it's only in the last 10 years of my political life that I actually went into full-time politics. And now I'm supposed to be retired. So there we are. That's the way, what you have to sometimes take the rough with the smooth. If you wanted to just justify where we are, it would be absolutely clear that for the Liberal Democrats, this is going to be a difficult election. We took that decision back in 2010 to join in a coalition, the only one where the numbers stood up in order to provide a stable economy and to a stable government in order to put the economy back on track. Now you're faced with a divergence of opinion now between ourselves and the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Summed up, I suppose, by the words that what we want to see is a stronger economy, but also a fairer society, which means, in effect, that we would borrow less money than the Labour Party would borrow, and we would cut less from the public sector than the Conservatives would. And in that, the fairer society element is the bit which I think most Liberal Democrats would say is the one which we have to put at the top of our agenda, because we can demonstrate that we have turned and helped to turn the economy round. But we do need to emphasize where our roots are. And to produce that fairer society means that we have to give opportunity to everyone. We have to see everyone as having an equal opportunity, and to remove the barriers and intervene as a government in the way in which those barriers interject with people's opportunities. And that goes from right at the very beginning. And one of the key things that I think you can see from what I've said this evening is that we absolutely and committed to the consequence of having a legislative context for the British Sign Language. It is so important as a fundamental to drive all the other changes for the deaf community. Secondly, it is important that we give people an early start, a quick start. Early intervention prevents problems later on. And so in the sense that we need to try and get in with the youngest and develop on our skills in education, that is a priority for us in this whole area as well. I end as I began, which says that we need to provide consideration, self-esteem, opportunity, and fairness. All those are aspects which you will find in our manifesto, which will be published in the next few days. And on the front page, as I said to you, will be that issue about mental health, which I hope you will listen to very carefully and try and follow through in the arguments. You know that we can make the difference as a party. We will continue to try and make that difference, and I hope that you will join us in that campaign for a fairer society and a stronger economy.
Mike, thank you. Kate.
I joined the Labour Party because I'm a socialist, and the Labour Party is a socialist party, a party that believes in justice, in equality, and in redistributing to achieve that equality from those who have to those who have not. And we are the only party which is a credible party of government with a redistributive agenda and a track record of making that redistribution in previous times in government. It's our commitment that all the choices we make, all the priorities we select, are decided upon within that context of equality and justice. And it's why you have seen the bravest commitments in this general election campaign coming from the Labour Party. Brave commitments to take on and tackle the rotten energy market that is favouring big businesses over individual families paying their bills. Brave decisions to take on non-domiciled people who are avoiding paying taxes by choosing to pretend that they don't live here when they've been here for many years. Brave decisions that say that if you own expensive property, you can afford to pay in more, and if you're earning less, you should be protected by a system of social security support that is there for you in time of need. Brave decisions that say that we will invest in our NHS and our welfare state, and those are the Labour Party's commitments. Underpinning all of that is our passionate belief in equality, equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome too. If we are not narrowing the gaps between different communities, different ethnic groups, between women and men, between LGBT and straight people, between disabled people, deaf people and non-disabled people, we are failing. And it is on that narrowing of those gaps that you judge a party and you judge a government. Our commitment is to policies that will narrow those gaps, but we'll only narrow them if we work together with you. And that's why I repeat the invitation I made at the beginning of this evening to join us in the new way of working that we will be adopting in government, to be in co-production with us, to be part of the policy-making process. And I look forward to working with you on May the 8th.
Well, we've come to the end, and I must say, the cracking discussion, and I'm absolutely privileged to have been here today, because I have never been to a meeting like this in all my life. And it's really been an eye-opener for me, and a terrific honour to have met you all and heard you all. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you also to the Deaf Association for chairing it, and to Lord Vergey for sponsoring it. I've been asked to ask you all to show your manifesto when you leave and when you are approached by candidates during this next month. The next month is going to be a very, very exciting time for all of us, because the outcome is just so uncertain, and it's going to change our lives whichever way it goes. So can I thank you all for being such a splendid audience, and to our 4 panelists for being so interesting and stimulating, and have a safe journey home. Thank you very much.
As chair of the British Deaf Association, I'd like to say thank you very much to Tom for chairing. Thank you very much to the panel. I'm sorry we haven't been able to answer all of your questions, but I think what was so important is that you yourselves came to the front and you directed your questions to the representatives of the different parties. Now, these are representatives by and large who live in a mainstream society, and we've had an opportunity to speak to them directly and have clear access to information. We certainly want a BSL Act. That seems to be a conciliatory view in the hall. Now, we've had some people at the back who've had their crisps and their drinks and things, so thank you for coming. And I value all of you who have come today. Take care getting home. People at the back having a chomp and he was jealous.
Where I come from? I went to 14 Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Yeah, which party?